Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the community session for June, presented by Basic Income Calgary and Enough for All. Today, we're really honored to have a keynote by Sheila Regher, and I'm sure that's who everybody is really here to see. They're not here to see me, which is totally fine. My name is Youens. I'll be the MC for today. I'm with Basic Income Calgary. First, like to start off in the spirit of reconciliation that we do acknowledge that we work, live, and play on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, including the Siksika, the Kainai, the Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda Nations, the Métis Nation Region 3, and all people who make their homes here in Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. We also just want to take a moment to acknowledge that our world is complicated. There is a lot going on. And tomorrow is going to be even more complicated than it is today. I know I myself, I've been engaged in deep reflection, conversations, and coming to a small understanding of the injustices that surround us all. COVID-19 is happening. Climate change is happening. Missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls is happening. Truth and reconciliation is happening, and Black Lives Matter is happening. But an awakening is also happening. A lot of individuals are working together towards a better tomorrow, and we're trying to find our places in that tomorrow that we're hoping to build. And in each and every piece of work that we do, let us reflect on our actions and on our impacts and the consequences that our actions have, and keep an eye on that ultimate end goal that we're trying to achieve. So let's build a better future together. This is much bigger than any individual, and this is going to take us all. So, as I mentioned, today's community session is presented by Basic Income Calgary. And let's get into a bit of the tech. So participants, your audio and video has been disabled. Please do use the chat feature to interact with one another, as well as the questions feature to ask guests questions. We'll be saving those questions up for the Q&A, both with Dr. Lewchuk as well as with Sheila Regehr. You know, and because something will go wrong, we do have some support, and it's already gone wrong today. We thought you were all going to have a little support button, which you don't. So please do keep an eye out for Regher, who you'll see BIC Tech Regher, and she'll be with you to help. And if you get disconnected, you know, feel free to rejoin by using the same URL you accessed for this webinar. And Regher, if you could please post the email address in case folks need to email you. Thank you very much. Awesome. Of course, this webinar is being recorded and will be shared publicly. So if you don't want to be recorded, you'll have to leave. I'm sorry. And copies of the slides with the embedded links will be made available to all participants via email as well. We're also really pleased that ASL and closed captioning is being supported by the Disability Action Hall. For those of you that are looking to ensure that you're always seeing, at the moment, Janice, who's doing the ASL translation, please make sure that you pin the ASL interpreter. We have 2 ASL interpreters today. They'll be taking turns, but you'll always find them, they'll have ASL at the beginning of their name. You can also turn on closed captioning by clicking on the closed captioning button at the bottom of your Zoom application. And again, we would just like to very much thank the Disability Action Hall as well as the Calgary SCOPE Society for providing our ability to ensure that we're being as inclusive as possible today. Let's also take a quick moment to discuss expectations of conduct today. In short, just be nice. and a little bit longer, this should be an online event free from harassment for everyone. Doesn't matter what a human being's gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, physical appearance, body size, race, religion, anything else is. That doesn't matter. Basic Income Calgary does not tolerate harassment of our participants in any form. So with that, let's finally actually get to the agenda. We're now sort of through the welcome piece. Our first session is what we call Basic Income Plus with Dr. Lewchuk. He'll have a presentation, and then we'll be doing a Q&A. That'll be about 30 minutes in total. They're going to have a basic income advocate guest join us, Kendal David. She'll be with us for about 10 minutes. And then, of course, we have our keynote with Sheila Regher, as well as a Q&A, and that'll be about 35 minutes in total. And then we'll be getting into closing and feedback. So what I would like to do is I would like to talk about Dr. Lewchuk. He's going to be really talking about basic income with respect to the modern labor market, specifically, around how basic income fits with insecure, precarious employment, but a little bit about Dr. Lewchuk. So he's a professor emeritus in the School of Labor Studies and Department of Economics. He holds an MA in Economic History from the University of Toronto and a PhD in Economics from the University of Cambridge. He was co-director of the Poverty and Employment Precarity in Southern Ontario project, and that's a joint initiative of the School of Labor Studies at McMaster University and the United Way Greater Toronto. In 2020, with his co-author Mohammed Ferdowsi and Tom McDowell and Stephanie Ross, he published an evaluation of Hamilton's basic income pilot. So please do join me in welcoming Dr. Lewchuk to your screen. Wayne, thank you for joining us today, and please do take it away.
Lovely, thank you, Matt. And thanks everyone for joining us in this important discussion, particularly this important time. I really want to talk a little bit about the economics of basic income. And there are two, I think, dominant themes or supporters of basic income from an economics point of view. One is there won't be any jobs. This is sort of the California version, the Silicon Valley. If only it was so, only if we ran out of work. I don't think we're going to run out of work or jobs. And I think the question is, what kind of jobs are we going to have in the future? Where might basic income fit in this? The second theory for explaining why we should have basic income is that the welfare system is broken, and it is broken. It's dehumanizing, and certainly basic income would help that. But we don't need a basic income to give more money to people who need it. We just need to give them more money and stop the system that we have, which is really quite pejorative. What I really want to talk about, though, is a third reason why I think basic income fits in as an economic policy, and that is because the labor market has changed. The labor market today is not the same as the labor market was 50 years ago. It has some fundamentally different characteristics, and basic income can be seen as a modern policy for a 21st century economy. Matt, if you go to the next slide for me. Okay, sorry, I have to be frank, I'm a bit of a data kind of driven person, but to me, pictures are quite important. I think this is a really very important picture. This is a picture of US data. The information we have that Canada is not all that different. And what you can see there is two lines that tell a very important story. The first line is the productivity line. That is the darker purple line. And what it shows that in the United States, between 1948 and 2017, productivity increased 2.5-fold. The US is an incredibly rich society, and it is getting richer every year. You can see, other than a little dip there in 2008, that line just keeps going up. And that answers one of the economic questions about basic income. Can we afford it? Absolutely, we can afford it. We're getting richer every year, and the money we need to fund basic income is well within our grasp, both in Canada and the United States. The second line there, the bottom line, the brighter pink line, that is a line of hourly compensation, wages plus benefits in the United States. And what you can see is those two lines have disengaged starting in the late 70s, early 80s, productivity continued to go up much as it had before 1980, but wages stopped going up. They have barely increased at all since 1980. And so the net result of this is we have a labor market that does not distribute the fruits of productivity the way it used to. Most people are not sharing. So we are a richer society, but most of us quite correctly don't feel much richer because we're not richer. And much of the productivity increase that we've had since 1980 has gone to a small cohort in our society, the top 10 or even the top 1%. Second slide, next slide if I could please. The second thing that's changed is the nature of employment has changed. So this is data from our PEPSO study. This is data from the Greater Toronto Hamilton area. And what it shows is that gold slice, those are people who are in what I call 1970s jobs. Those are jobs that are permanent, full-time, secure, and tend to be paid. And between 2011 and 17, there was a slight increase, but still barely half of the working population aged 25 to 65 are in those kinds of jobs. Everyone else is in some kind of insecurity. And what we've seen happen since the 1980s, when those two lines disengaged, the productivity and the wage line disengaged, is the nature of employment changed. More and more people are working as part-time workers, short-term contracts, gig workers, whether it's Fedora, which has been in the news lately, or Uber, or other sorts of people. They're not in the kinds of jobs that provide a permanent, secure basis upon which to maintain a family. And to me, this is really where basic income really fits in. It is a policy, much like the unemployment insurance policy was in the 1930s and 40s to fix the Depression. Basic income fits in with a modern labor market where more and more of us are working in temporary, short-term, contract, gig kinds of employment. Now, this kind of flexibility in this labor market is marvelous. Who doesn't want to have flexibility, but we'd also like to have some security. And what the PEPSO study showed is those people who are not in the gold slice of those two charts are more likely to suffer health problems, mental and physical health problems. Their households are more stressed. They participate less in their community. And this is just bad for all of us as a society. Next slide, please. So that led one of my interests in basic income and led to my being lucky enough to be part of a study which looked at the experience of Hamilton basic income participants during the Ontario pilot, which was so abruptly canceled the year before last. But for about 18 months, 1,000 people in Hamilton received a basic income, and we went out and we surveyed them and we interviewed them to try and get an understanding of what their experience was. This is a bit of a complex graph, but let me just try and help you see what is going on here. Along the left-hand column is the type of employment people had before they entered the basic income pilot. So some people were in precarious employment, some people were in self-employment, some people were in permanent employment, some people didn't work. Along the top row is the kind of employment they had during basic income. So during the basic income pilot, some people were in precarious employment, some people were self-employed, some were permanent, some did not work. And the cells represent the percentage of people who had those two characteristics, a before basic income employment type and an after basic income employment type. There are two key points here. One is the vast majority of people continued to work during the pilot who were working before the pilot. They did not abandon the market. They didn't put their feet up and watch the Toronto Maple Leafs, or it'd be more optimistic if you, I guess you were in Calgary, you could watch Calgary. But here, they just did not do that. They continued working. And they continued working even though they were being taxed at a rate of 50% on any income they earned during the pilot. And I think that just reflects people wanted to work. Now, about 10% or 15% of people stopped working during the pilot who were working before the pilot. Of those people, A large number went back to school to upgrade their skills with the intention of re-entering the labor market at a later moment in time. Some people took time out of the labor market to care for sick children or sick family members, which is, again, is a positive social contribution. To be frank, some people just took a breather from a job they had that was wearing them down, that didn't really provide them very much income. What you can see is that there was a slight reduction in the number of people who were in precarious employment and an increase in the number of people who were self-employed during the pilot. So what we saw is this kind of explosion of entrepreneurial activity by people because they had more security. I think this is one of the important lessons of our study and an important economic lesson, that if you give people some stability, they don't leave the labor market, they continue working the labor market, and in some ways they continue working in a better way. And if we can go to the next slide, you can see exactly what happened. So the next slide, we asked them what happened to their pay, hourly pay, as a result of their employment during basic income compared to before. And what you can see is 1/3 of our sample said they actually moved into a better paying job. So they actually were contributing more to the economy. They were stimulating demand in other sectors. They were taking better care of their households and their families. And this is an important, I think, reason why we might want to support basic income given the changing nature of our labor market. Now you might ask, why did this happen? Why were they able to move into better paying jobs? And I think the next slide provides some of the clues. They're able to move into better paying jobs in part because they had a better outlook on life. They were much less likely to feel angry. So 80%, almost 80% of our sample told us they felt angry less often during receiving basic income than before. So they had that better outlook on life. And the second graph in the bottom right-hand corner showed that over 80%, almost 85%, so they had a somewhat or better, more positive outlook on life. So if I'm an employer, I'd want to look for someone with a positive outlook on life. That makes people more employable. If people are more employable, they'll be more successful in the labor market. If they're more successful in the labor market, that's just good for the economy. That's good for society. And the other things we saw, and again, I can't go into all the details. You can have a look at our report if you want to see all the details. People reported they were healthier during the basic income pilot. Their mental health improved during the basic income pilot. They drank less. They smoked less. They adopted better lifestyles. And all of that makes people more employable. And so employers should be looking at basic income as a positive policy, which will increase their chances of finding workers who can do the tasks that they want them to do. Next slide, if we could. Okay, so that's basically what I want to say. What I really want to say is that basic income is affordable because we're becoming a richer society. It fixes the distribution of income problem, which has become increasingly less equal since the 1980s as a result of the disengagement of productivity growth from wage growth. It fills some security in a labor market where more and more people are insecure in precarious and insecure employment. That's going to be good for the health of our economy, the health of our individuals, the health of our households, the health of our communities, and it's a reason I think we should be very positively looking at basic income. I'll stop there and invite people to ask questions. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you very much, Wayne. I appreciate that. Let me just stop that screen share. So we have a couple questions. While we just give folks some time to maybe think of some. You talked about the explosion of entrepreneurial activity, and here in Alberta, we seem to beat our chests and pride ourselves on being a province of entrepreneurs. How do you feel this entrepreneurship data could effectively be leveraged to gain support from a provincial government?
Sure. I mean, I think what we're seeing is that a lot of people in our current labor market have to make short-term decisions just to put food on the table and to survive, right? They do what they have to do. And that's not necessarily taking advantage of their natural skills. And I think from a government point of view, I mean, let's be blunt. You want people to make lots of money because lots of people who make lots of money pay lots of taxes. We may not like taxes, but that's a reality, right? And when people pay taxes, we have better hospitals, we have better roads, we have a better society. So I think from the perspective of a government, what they want people to do is to be able to completely realize their potential. And I think right now, that is the shortcoming of our labor market. Probably about a third of our labor force are not fully realizing their creative potentials, their skills. They're not able to spend enough time in school to develop their talents. And all of this is weighing down on our society in terms of there's a cohort in society that's contributing less than they could. And that's what the government should want to encourage.
So we have a great question here from Karen. She's wondering what would happen in the residential construction sector with the introduction of UBI. Would there be an increase in the construction of housing to meet the need for people looking for affordable housing? Do you have any sort of data around this?
No, I don't. I think that is a great question. I think this really speaks to the potential of basic income to put money in people's pockets and how they're going to spend that money. And what we do know is that the people who benefit from basic income are going to be people in lower paid jobs. People in lower paid jobs, they spend their money locally, whether that's on housing, whether that's in their community. What we did see in our pilot test was that people on basic income were able to move to better housing, not necessarily buying a house, because to be very honest with you, on $17,000 a year, you're not buying a house in the Toronto-Hamilton region, but they were able to move into marginally better accommodations. And again, if you move into better accommodations, you have better health. If you have better health, you're more likely to be able to participate in the labor market to your full potential. So I think there are indications that people do get better housing, but I think we're going to need much more than just a basic income to solve the housing problem. We're still going to need a housing policy.
So we have a really interesting question from Penny. The question that Penny here is coming from friends with fewer resources is how would basic income affect access to services? So specifically, some folks would rather have funds put into education, healthcare, and housing, in which case the minimum wage society would be less harmful.
Yeah. Basic income is not a panacea for everything. I refer to the basic income, it's a very basic income. It's just a minimum to prevent people from falling through a floor where they really get themselves in trouble. And so in terms of services, we still need a universal pharmacare policy. Basic income is not going to fix that. We still need a housing policy. Oh my God, we need a proper childcare policy. We're seeing the disaster that we're having right now without that. So we're still going to need childcare. On $17,000 a year, you're not going to be able to fund decent childcare for your kids. So we're still going to need all those things. But what basic income, I think, does is it gives people both some dignity, that they have a little bit of money in their pocket, but also some security that they're not going to go into complete abject poverty. And those are the benefits of basic income. These other services are still going to be needed. And I think we still have a discussion around those things as well.
So when I was looking at your data, and I'm very much usually I'm not a number cruncher. Usually I always think about other people. And one of the questions that I had, and John Rook has something very similar, is like, where does happiness come into all of this? And, John's piece is, is there a well-being financial threshold? So at what income point do we stop feeling unhappy?
Yeah, there's a lot of research on amongst the economists. You might think that's a bit odd because economists are not known for thinking about happiness. They think about price of butter and whatnot. But I think there's a recognition that there's a fairly low income upon which happiness doesn't increase anymore. So people who make $1 million are not a whole lot happier than people who make $50,000, to be very honest with you. But what we also know is that people who make 50,000 are a lot better off than people who make 5. And so, again, basic income as a very basic income is moving us in the right direction. I don't think $17,000 a year in the Southern Ontario is going to solve all of those problems. It's just going to make things a bit better. I think the evidence here is in the number of people who continue to work. What those people basically said is 17,000 is not enough. I need more to have a decent standard of living, to be as happy as I can be. And so I'm going to keep working, even though, again, people have to keep in mind that the rules of the basic income in the pilot were half of your income was taxed back if you made any. So if you were making $10,000 a year, half that would be taxed back, $5,000, by a reduction in your basic income allotment from $17,000 to $12,000. So if they're in basic income, they're on minimum wage jobs, they were working for about $7 an hour, but they were still working because 17,000 was not enough.
One of the, I'm certainly not an expert, but, one of the things that I hear about is, some of the support systems that we have in place right now are so cumbersome that, individuals get punished for earning more money, right? And so with this tax of the 50%, individuals like here in Alberta that would be on AISH, if they're earning more money, they're not going to lose, services. And so one of the questions that I have is, or actually Shauna has, is did any people in the study, were they actually disabled?
Yes, there were disabled people in the study, and that was an issue, because certainly if you're on ODSP in Ontario, then as well as the income you get from ODSP, you do get other services, a drug plan, other kinds of supports. And one of the things they had to do in order to attract people who were disabled onto ODSP, onto the basic income, was to also continue those kinds of services. So I think the answer to that question is, people have different needs. 17,000 is not going to satisfy all of those needs. And so we're going to continue to need special supports around education, special supports around disability, people who are, get themselves into problems with drugs and whatnot. We're going to need a support system there, because a couple bucks is not going to fix that problem. And so we're still going to need those kinds of supports. And I think that's an important point. Basic income is not, let's wipe the slate clean of all kinds of services we have right now. What it is it's a small policy to plug what is a serious gap in how our society functions in terms of labor market and who's able to function in that labor market.
So maybe kind of following up on that, we have a question from Tony. Why do you say basic income can fix the inequality we see now when it only provides that modest income to a fairly small percentage of the population?
Yeah, rather than fix completely, it moves us in the right direction. Okay. Look, basic income is going to have to be paid for. You can't just give people money and not, someone doesn't pay for it. And so I think my argument would be that those people who have really made out well in the last 50 years, those people in the top 10%, top 1%, they're going to have to share some of their income in order to provide a little bit more for those people at the bottom. So basic income can move us in the right direction, but it is not going to move us to an equal society. They're absolutely right. But at least it is going to potentially reverse the trend that has been all too prevalent in the last 30 or 40 years, which makes our society today as unequal as it was prior to World War I, which is really a shocking figure to think about it. The top 10% claims the same share of income today as they did back in the robber baron days prior to World War I. That's just not acceptable.
Well, I think we've got time for just a couple more questions, and I gotta say there are some amazing questions coming in from our attendees, so thank you all for your questions. If we don't get to your question here, maybe hold on to it, and we might be able to see if we can put Sheila on the hot seat later as well. So Kent is asking, are there any downsides to basic income that are legitimate, or can all anti-basic income arguments be ably countered?
Yeah, look, some people are going to abuse a basic income, right? So some people will put their feet up and watch the Toronto Maple Leafs. It's a very bad idea, but some people will do that. But I think everything we know about basic income, the tests that have been done of it, the studies that have been done of it, suggests that a very, very small percentage of people are going to be in that situation. And I think what we need to do is we need to design 21st century policies that reflect what the vast majority of people will do. And the vast majority of people on basic income will use this as a foundation to leverage themselves into a better situation in their households and their societies. And so I think that there's not a reason to abandon basic income because 5% of the people will abuse it. We should design basic income for the 95% who will make good use of it.
Great. So let's have two more questions. Sarah wants to know, why was the program study stopped? Did the data not speak for itself?
Okay, I was part of the provincial evaluation panel. There was a team of about 20 academics who were asked to evaluate the study. The pilot was canceled because the incoming Conservative provincial government didn't think that basic income was the right way to go. So they stopped it after 18 months, and they stopped it before we received a single piece of analyzable data. We were just about to go into the field with our first survey. Excuse me. So all we had was information on who enrolled in basic income. We have zero information on its impact, which is really a tragedy, which really motivated myself and my small team of researchers at McMaster to scrape together a few $1,000s to do the study in the pilot. But it was an ideological. There was no evidence to support their position. It was just ideological.
Great, thank you. And one last question. You talked a little bit at the very beginning about sort of automation and Silicon Valley, and there's a lot of talk about, if we had a crystal ball and we could look to see what does the combination of really well-designed machines that physically can do amazing things, as well when you combine that with artificial intelligence. Do you really see, what does that look like to you with respect to the labor market?
Yeah, look, I look forward to this new wave of technology. I think that's fantastic. People raise a lot of questions about technology, and I think there's a famous statement by a famous economist, who not necessarily my political stripe, but his statement is valid. He was observing a construction site, and he noticed that people were using shovels rather than modern equipment. And he was asked, well, why are they using shovels and not steam, modern mechanized equipment? And the answer was, well, we needed to stimulate employment. And so the response to the economist is, well, why don't you take away the shovels and give them spoons, right? And you employ a whole lot more people. So I think technology is fantastic. I think we work too much, and there are so many things that need doing that machines could do. I look at long-term care homes and the kind of support, the social support people need, education, what our children need, ability of people to flourish in the arts, etc. And there's lots that we can do. So I think we should welcome automation. I think we should welcome mechanization, get rid of as many of those jobs as we can, and give us an opportunity to realize our full creativity. And I think we'll have a much better society. So I have no fear. We are very creative. We'll find things to do. And I think as long as we have a market system, people will find things for us to do that they'll allow them to make a profit.
Wayne, well, thank you very much for joining us today. I really enjoyed it. And based on some of the comments, it seems like our attendees really enjoyed your perspective as well. So again, my thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Perfect. Okay, so at this point, I would like to introduce Kendal David. And as I find my notes here, Our next speaker is Kendal David. As an advocate guest, Kendal is here today to talk about the work that she and her fellow youths are doing with respect to basic income in Canada. Kendal, so she, her, is a Master of Social Work student at Carleton University with experience in the disability sector, community development and organizing, and critical social research. Kendal graduated with a Bachelor of Social Work from the University of Calgary in 2019. And while completing her undergraduate social work practicum placements, she grew more interested in basic income activism as a response to inadequate social policy and flawed approaches to addressing income insecurity through charity and philanthropy. Kendal went on to become a founding member of the Basic Income Canada Youth Network and currently serves as the Administration and Education Officer. Kendal believes that as Calgarians, we have a responsibility to build a future where none of our neighbors are without means to lead a dignified life, while in one of the most prosperous and dynamic cities in the world. Please welcome Kendal David to your screens. Kendal, thank you for joining us today, and over to you.
All right. You can hear me okay, Matt? My microphone's working perfect. Okay, thank you for having me here today. And thanks to Basic Income Calgary for inviting me to participate. As Matt mentioned in my introduction, my name is Kendal. I use she, her pronouns. I'm on the steering committee of the Basic Income Canada Youth Network. I am going to share my screen with you so that you can see the slides. Give me 1 second to get this all going. There we go. Okay, perfect. There's the picture of me. All right, so I'm going to be talking about the Basic Income Canada Youth Network. So this group emerged just this year to mobilize younger people in the basic income movement and to advocate for the youth-specific case for basic income. So we're a group of young people, so people under 35 in Canada who are passionate about basic income. And we are affiliated and partnered with other basic income organizations, but also other youth organizations. So we, our mission at BICYN is to mobilize young people to advocate for and celebrate the benefits of a basic income through community building, education, and activism. So we want everyone in Canada to have the income to meet their needs, participate meaningfully in their communities, and live with dignity. And we also want young people to have an active and valued role in the basic income movement, but also in shaping public policy. So we, in our experience, have found that young people are often left out of conversations about policies that affect them. And we think it's really important to bring young people into the fold of the basic income movement because there seems to be a bit of a lack of youthful representation within the activism space. And we also think that there's a really important youth case for basic income that would strengthen the movement. And so on that note, there are lots of reasons, I think, for how basic income would specifically be beneficial for a younger population. I won't go into too much detail here. And once the slides are sent out, you can click on the links that I've included to read some more. But really what it comes down to for us is that we think a basic income could provide stability for young people to be able to plan for and invest in their futures with less fear and uncertainty than we're facing right now. There's a number of social and structural factors that make it hard for young people in Canada to be hopeful and excited about our future. So some of those things include really high levels of student loan debt, and precarious work. So as Wayne mentioned, precarious work is very challenging for the spirit and challenging for entrepreneurialism and creativity. And precarious work is also often disproportionately done by young people and folks who are otherwise marginalized in the labor market. And so again, as Wayne mentioned, having a basic income would provide people with some security to be able to leverage themselves into more meaningful opportunities within the paid labor market. Another key component of what we're interested in the youth network is starting to shift the culture a bit around the connection between income security and the paid labor market. So while of course there are lots of economic reasons, again, that Wayne mentioned for how basic income would be beneficial, we also think that there's a lot of labor that happens that isn't recognized and valued through income in a paid labor market, and a basic income would be able to shift the dynamics a bit, to shift the connection, the idea that the only way to live a meaningful life is to be paid for your work, for your labor, in an often exploitative system. And we also recognize, of course, that people are multiply marginalized in the paid labor market. So young people may be more likely to be conducting precarious work, but that's going to be even more the case for Indigenous youth, for racialized youth, disabled youth, queer youth, and youth aging out of care, among other factors. Okay, so that's the youth case for basic income, but there's also a case for youth activism within the basic income movement, which is kind of especially where this network comes into play. So youth represent a pretty big proportion of the Canadian population. In 2019, we accounted for over a quarter of the Canadian population, which means we have a pretty significant current and future influence as a voting bloc. We also know that through public opinion research that youth are more likely to favor a basic income than older folks. However, there's a really distinct lack of young people in the basic income activism space in Canada, which is where our network comes in. We want to kind of fill that gap and create some spaces for, again, the youth-specific case and for conversations with young people to be politically engaged on this topic. And so I included a quote here from one of my fellow members of the steering committee, Chloe Halpenny. So she says, young people in this country are powerful, intelligent, and resilient. Many of us will live through not one, but two major economic crises before turning 30, and we deserve to be heard in conversations conversations about decisions that will drastically affect our lives. And so we think that having youth involved in conversations about basic income is important and also valuable for the movement. Okay, so we, as a network, only just got our formal start this year. So we held our very first public online event on April 1st, which, you know, simultaneously feels like it was ages ago and also like it was just yesterday. Time is weird right now. But anyways, we're very fresh, we're very new, but we've really hit the ground running and had great success in our first few initiatives. So some of the things we've been up to so far. We co-authored a letter to the Prime Minister with the Canadian Council of Young Feminists, calling for guaranteed livable income, so the transition from a CERB to a basic income. And we had endorsements representing over 1 million young people across the country, which was quite significant. We've hosted 2 educational webinars on basic income and ran a virtual brainstorming session with young people on the youth case. We've also been very busy building our network and membership structure. So again, things have really taken off for us very quickly, and we're excited about that. And so we're building our structure right now to be sure that we have space for people to contribute in a meaningful way and participate with our work. And we've also been very fortunate and excited to be invited to participate in sessions with other groups, the Tamarack Institute, Ontario Council for International Cooperation, and Engineers Without Borders, and sessions like this with the local and regional basic income chapters. Okay, and so the ways that you can learn more about our work or help us out. This is a really, really brief introduction to our work, and we'd love to engage and chat with you more if you're interested in doing so. So the best way to keep up with us is by subscribing to our newsletter. Once these slides are out, you can click right on the links. You can also access these links from our website, which is their basicincomecanada.org/youth_network. If you're 35 or younger, you can become a member of BICYN. And if you're older than 35, consider chatting with young people that you know and encouraging them to become a member as well. And then I would also, I know there's a lot of really incredible people who are participating and facilitating this conversation today, who are often having conversations about basic income, who are doing incredible advocacy and activism work in this space, and who are doing incredible advocacy and activism in policy, shaping social policy generally. And so I'd encourage you to consider actively inviting youth into those conversations, bringing them into the fold, considering how we are often left out of conversations that involve us, and the ways that you can open up those spaces for young people to be included, and not just included, but heard and valued as well. And we love to get emails, and so please feel free to send us an email and contact us if you have any questions or comments. Thank you so much to all of you for being here, and to Basic Income Calgary for having me today. And I think I'm at my time, so I will stop now. Thank you.
Kendal, thank you very much. Very much appreciate it. I'm glad you were able to join us today. So now moving on to the main event. We have, now I'm going to read out this title for this piece. Our keynote speaker is Sheila Regher, with The Razor's Edge of Change, Basic Income and the Basic Income Movement in the Time of Minority Federal Government, COVID-19, Climate Change, Truth and Reconciliation, Anti-Racism Activism, and Economic Recovery. So I would like to introduce Sheila. Sheila is a founding member of the Basic Income Canada Network and has been its chairperson since 2014. She's also a former executive director of the National Council of Welfare, an independent advisory body to the federal government that published the only comparative reports available on Canada's 13 different social assistance systems, comprehensive poverty profiles, and analytic reports focused on solutions. Sheila's 29-year career in the federal public service also spanned frontline work, policy analysis and development, and senior management. She was a Canadian negotiator at several United Nations World Conferences on gender equality and social development, and chaired UN negotiations on poverty and on unpaid work. Sheila's insights also come from experiencing poverty herself as a young parent. So Basic Income Calgary and Enough for All are thrilled to have Sheila join us today. Sheila, welcome to our June community session.
Thank you so much, Matt. And thank you to everyone. The Zoom technology is wonderful, but I wish I could see everybody. So I know there are friends in the crowd. So Matt has kindly given the long title of my presentation. I think Kendal's title would have worked too. Time is weird. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about is time. We're really in a crisis situation now, I think. And one of the cool things about crises, unfortunately, is that it does offer an opportunity for change and some break with the past, allowing for things to come to the fore that wouldn't be considered in normal times. And I think this is a great thing for basic income for a number of reasons. The other side of this, though, the razor's edge, is that things are moving in our direction, but status quo forces are not going to give up easily. And we're hearing from politicians that battle lines are being drawn. So I want to talk about a few things. And from my perspective, just in addition to what Matt said, so I am the white minority in quite a racially diverse family, mostly Black. I am a former federal public servant, so I bring that to this mix, and I'm chair. And it's even harder than ever now to divide up my life into those boxes. So I'm going to talk about these 5 things: the edge, looking at what's happening at the federal government level, what's happening with civil society, the basic income movement, and then where do we go from here, which is the really critical part. So if we move now to the edge, Matt? with a lovely photo, which is how I feel right now. And it shows up even in my heart rate. Like, I feel that we are at a moment where things can go either way. So whatever is going to happen, governments now have responsibility, opportunity, and a great challenge. And leadership really matters. And in some respects, our leadership matters too. The economy is not going to open up in a way that's predictable. There's going to be ongoing disruption. Things depend on what happens with this virus, and how much racism and colonialism we're going to tolerate for much longer. So there's a lot going on, a lot of pressures, including budget pressures on governments. One of the greatest things I learned as a federal public servant was that a good policy idea won't get you very far. Political pressure will. And I think we now have, in the basic income movement, a great policy idea, and the political pressure is mounting. So where the federal government is going to go now is like this path that's going to diverge somewhere fairly soon. Either CERB ends and we go back to the old paradigms and they're not going to work, it's going to be bad. Or CERB is extended month by month and we're kind of in this limbo for a while and people get anxious because they don't know. Or we start transitioning to a basic income guarantee. So let's move now and look at the federal government and see what's happening there. And I think the signs there for me are really positive. We've got, Kendal mentioned some of this, we've got great relationships with quite a number of senators and MPs in the House of Commons across party lines. We have submitted briefs to the committees who are looking into COVID response. There's also an all-party anti-poverty caucus that's been around for a while. Nate Erskine-Smith was its chair and still has a leadership role there. I'm not sure how formalized the caucus is. He joked that they used to have meetings and 7 people showed up. The last meeting they had, I think I counted over 50 people who were on that call, and it included civil society. So what, in particular, I think CERB has done an amazing job for the basic income case. And I'll talk just very briefly about that because I think it's important for us to think about as we go forward. So first, back one. Okay, we're still on the positive side. Matt's jumping to the negative stuff. We'll get there. So the positive side is that it shows federal leadership. It shows us that public health matters as much as the economy and that that's recognized. It shows us that contrary to what we have been led to believe for years and years, the Department of Finance and the Canada Revenue Agency can move fast and be responsive. And that's been one of the criticisms of some of the basic income designs is that it's not responsive enough. Well, they've shown they can do it. They've shown that direct cash works, and they recognize that direct cash works. They've shown that the $2,000 benchmark is a reasonable one. And the last one I love, they have created the perfect work disincentive to show you how it really works, which is very unlike a basic income. And even with its enormous disincentives, so that if you earn $1,001, you get kicked out of the $2,000 category. Even with that, Employment Minister Qualtrough was recently commenting in the news that employment figures show that even that's not working. Like, you can't stop people from wanting employment. So let's now move to the next section, which shows that there are some concerns about basic income still out there, and they're legitimate. People are talking about questions of affordability, not just in general, because I think Wayne has answered that. We're, generally rich economies, we can afford this, but there's an increasing concern now with the state of the economy now and all the shutdown, how that's going to play out. One of the things we heard loud and clear, as people started talking about basic income more and more, it started getting really confusing about what models worked, and particularly the phrase universal basic income made a lot of people think about the Andrew Yang proposal in the States and about the idea that you would give money to everybody, that somehow Galen Weston was going to get a check too, and he didn't need it. So we've managed to, try to bust some of those myths to talk about doing basic income without giving money to rich people. I've heard some denial of, the fact that we're in a strange situation, but we shouldn't be making major decisions right now. We need to wait till things calm down. They're not going to calm down. And then there's the fear of austerity and public service reductions. Wayne talked about that. The fear is there. One of the concerns that I have, that I've heard from people, is that even though voices for basic income are growing louder, in general, the government doesn't seem to be really focused on long-term planning yet. They're still very much in crisis mode. So let's look now at what the national picture looks like for those outside of government. So there's a lot of information here, and in the notes that Matt can make available to you, there's more. For the sake of time, I would just highlight that what's happening now is coalition building. Everybody is trying to organize together around things like the basic principles of just recovery, so that the future going forward works for everybody. And basic income is very much becoming a part of the discussion of all of those larger coalitions. So our voices are growing louder, they're coming from more places, and it's really exciting. But again, the flip side is there is some reluctance still. Part of the reluctance, I think, and I love Matt's little picture here, the don't panic sign, because I'm one that does tend to panic sometimes. I think what's really great for the basic income movement is that a lot of other people aren't very prepared to respond to this crisis, and we are. It's like I said, when something happens and the political pressure builds, if you have the good idea, you're going to gain a lot of ground. One of the things that we hear quite a bit, I think, is about changing relationships. Again, Wayne talked about some of this. There will be a change in employer-employee relationships. Some people think employers will take advantage. Other people think it will help employees to gain bargaining power. There's also this sort of debate around charity versus justice models, and the idea that, who the helpers are and who is being helped is going to change when you have people on basic income who have regained some autonomy. For me, like I said, a good portion of my family is Black. I've done a lot of studying of American history, and I hear echoes constantly of, with basic income, everything's going to change, our economy is going to collapse. Well, they said that about the abolition of slavery too, even amongst the Northerners, who said, we don't like slavery, but oh my God, ending it is going to cause economic collapse. It didn't. It simply didn't. So what I want to talk about right now is, again, this goes back to what Kendal was saying, like time is weird. In the basic income movement, we've been focused on long-term activities, not knowing when this is going to happen. But now we've got current crisis, we've got a movement that's grown enormously, and we've got a crowded field with other people talking about basic income too. So I'm going to spend a few minutes just talking about Basic Income Canada Network's journey through this. So Matt's next slide is called Yesterday. And the very quick story on this one is that when BICN started, we were a big tent. If you were interested in the concept, come and talk to us. And then we evolved fairly rapidly, and some in the international community followed us to say, no, we're not going the libertarian model. We have some standards and some principles here for what we think we want to see in Canada. So we designed this principled statement, the basic income we want. Then we got detoured from our national work a little bit to focus on the Ontario pilot. We were involved right from the early design stage through the cancellation. And then we moved back into policy options, modeled things that were timed amazingly to impact the federal minority government in January 2020. Then COVID hit, and we went through another major shift and debate within our board about sort of suspending our big tent, more open ecumenical focus, and said, nope, crisis, option one is needed now, do it. So that's where we are. Literally, that was yesterday. And today, I saw somebody in the chat talking about Mulroney declaring support for basic income. Every day, something else happens. So today, with the Basic Income Canada Network, in the next slide, Matt, so we're looking at a number of things to try to capitalize on what's happened and catch up. So we're looking at new website design, strategies and tools for communications, because our work has changed, the movement has changed, the world has changed, and technology has changed, hence our webinar today. We're working in partnership with others around Federal Lobby Day, the Cases for Basic Income, working with the Youth Network and a whole lot of other people. We're trying to figure out how NABIG is going to work in the new virtual order. In real life, most of us were hoping that we would have been, a lot of us, together in May to look at strategizing for the future. We've delayed our AGM and whatever. So now we're looking at conceptualizing new models of how we organize across the country too. And I won't go into detail, but I can answer questions. Because the most important point is the final slide, which talks not about BICN, but about where we all go from here. And we are facing unprecedented times. I think it requires careful political strategy, and I'm not a political strategist, but here's my list of 7 things based on brain studies that say your brain can't handle more than 7 things at a time. So, talk to political strategists. Keep doing what works, and as if every moment counts. So we're back to the razor's edge. I really do believe that. Do it bigger, noisier, with more people in more places, right? Get media attention, Zoom, March, anything that's happening, social media for those younger people who can tolerate it. Work behind the scenes quietly too. Inside political parties, municipal governments are another, I think, rich source of support for basic income. Be helpful. If anybody wants anything from you, if they have a question, answer it. If they're looking for more information, help them find it. Put time, energy, and money where you mean it. I know that there are a couple of other people, at least on this call, who, like me, have told organizations that claim to be progressive and that we have supported for a long time. We have told them that our ongoing support depends on whether they come on board with basic income, because this is the critical issue right now. And then 7, it sounds like a minor thing, but numbers count. When federal politicians are looking at who's going to support basic income when it comes to voting time. So if you get people to sign on to the BICN website, you don't have to commit to ever hearing from us again. But if you sign up, those numbers grow, and that adds to our legitimacy as a movement. So that's all for me. And now you get to ask the questions about the things that matter to you rather than me.
Great, Sheila, thank you so much. Things have been rolling in fast and furious here. And apparently Brian Mulroney has issued a statement today that includes support of basic income. And I think Regher has that URL, so perhaps she can post that to all of our attendees. That would be fantastic. Thank you, Regher. Okay, question number 1. I'm a proponent of the universal basic income, but recently spoke to someone who talked about young people, probably like Kendal, in places like Tofino, who call CERB the surf benefit because they work just enough to make $1,000 so they can collect CERB and surf all day. This person would love to know how to respond to comments like these.
So I think it's a great comment and it's a great reflection. I have even heard rumors that somebody inside designed this CERB work disincentive benefit. I mean, part of it might have been well-intentioned as an idea to really try to keep people home. And in the early days of COVID, that made sense. Makes no sense for an economic recovery. But I heard the rumor that they created such a bad work disincentive that it would actually help people understand the importance of basic income in the long run. We may have a friend or two inside, you never know. But yeah, it's the CERB, some of the things about the CERB are really good, some of the things are really bad. And this one shows you that things do need to be designed better.
We have a question here from Charlie. You know, they got the sense from census data in their area, which is Medicine Hat, that women and people of color-led families are having the largest difficulty breaking into gold area jobs, and perhaps that speaks back to Wayne's presentation. What is any kind of hypothesis or thought about how basic income would affect market penetration for vulnerable groups?
So that's a great question. And I think it has sort of multiple parts for me, or multiple things in there. So one of the things we do know from the pattern of past epidemics and crises like this is that women do not do very well. So as difficult as things were in terms of gender inequality going in, coming out and recovering, women tend to lose. In COVID-19 case, people are actually calling this a she-cession instead of a recession. Because we see, you know, the problems. And for me, like, so much of my career was spent working on unpaid work, non-market work, and how we understand it and how we don't measure it and value it and include it in economic indicators. So we get to just ignore it. So it's very clear that, like, this is the basis of the economy. If you don't have that, you don't go anywhere. So with a basic income, you're not going to be able to maybe get those higher jobs that you want right away, but it does provide, as Wayne said earlier, a level of stability and flexibility that enables people to have more options, and especially women to have options, combined with childcare and good labor market policies, allows them to have more opportunities to manage their family and employment responsibilities in a way that suits them and is healthy and good for them.
One of our questions from Basic Income Calgary co-founder Yvonne, is it time to define work as more than employment, right? All of that unpaid caring work in families and communities.
Yeah, this is huge. I mean, if I could do one major thing to completely redesign the economy going forward, it would be to just abolish GDP as an economic measure of anything, because it doesn't tell us anything about the quality of people's lives. You know, it just tells us that there's economic stuff happening out there. And it's like, great, my drug dealer is adding to GDP. My mother-in-law, who's looking after half her family, gets no credit for anything. So yeah, it's huge. And I take every opportunity, every time I see something written too, or verbally, and I lapse myself sometimes, I mean, not perfect, but I always try to distinguish between employment and work. And if you mean employment, you must say employment. You must not categorize work as its equivalent, because they're not. Thank you, Yvonne.
Natasha asks, if basic income was rolled out nationally, is there conversation about how it would interface with the economic structures that operate on Indigenous reserves? Does this forward conversation about addressing the Indian Act?
Oh boy, that's it's a big question, and I am not an expert really qualified to talk about it a lot. However, I have heard from a number of people, and I'm working with Leah Gazan's office, actually. We've got a request into the Library of Parliament to get us some data on the experience of rolling out other kinds of basic income-like benefits on reserve. Seniors benefits, child benefits for families with young children, to see what that experience looks like on reserve and how it looks different than other places. There is already some work that has been done by a consultant for CRA that looks at some of that. And the issue seems to be not so much with the benefits themselves, but with problems with people being able to access them, to know that they're there, to know how to get them, to know what it takes to qualify. And those things can be fixed. And Evelyn Forget, for example, was telling me about different things in Manitoba that are there where, for example, rather than having to deal with CRA and the, heavy government types kind of thing, they have community service workers, who are known and trusted, who deliver healthcare and other things in the community to help people file tax returns so that it's done in a friendly way. Even the CRA report indicated that, when people realize that they can get benefits out of the tax system, when they understand that, they're not so reluctant to file. And if they have somebody who can help them understand and recognize that people's privacy isn't going to be invaded. One of the interesting things as well on reserve is that some of these benefits are and the interaction and what's needed is much better understood by women than men. And it's because the women largely have care of the children. So accessing child benefits is critical.
So speaking about benefits and programs, we kind of have this combination of questions from many people. So what current welfare programs should be eliminated to enable a BI? How can we protect existing programs, especially for those with fewer resources that are worried more things will privatize once more people have funds to make their own choices? So as an example, would BI support universal housing?
Great question. In the modeling that Basic Income Canada did to fund its options for basic income, what we took was the income money that social assistance delivers, the income that would go to people, that gets pulled in and rolled into a basic income. We also took a portion of administrative income, and for us, that would be like defunding the police. So you're defunding the welfare police, but we left some in there because we know that there are people who are going to rely on having caseworkers and having some services and having some additional supports. So some of those other programs are going to be really important. I also had discussions way back around the time of the Ontario pilot with social service workers in this area. It works differently in Ontario than other places. And they were really interested in themselves trying to figure out what services really would be needed, how service delivery would look in a basic income world, and how they can shift to actually doing the jobs they were trained for. There was one small table that I was at where one of the women said, she just asked her colleagues, she said, does any of you actually get to practice social work? And they laughed, they just, well, heck no. And, with this new kind of framework, you allow that to happen. You allow the real needs to be identified that aren't just poverty related. And you get to treat those by people whose expertise is to do precisely that.
With respect to childcare, and Natasha is wondering, how is affordable childcare being sort of woven into this conversation of basic income? because it's quite expensive, and many of us need to use childcare as they don't have family or friends to watch over our children while they work.
Yep. When I was working at Status of Women Canada in the early 1980s, we were all working on the childcare file. Like, there is more research that has gone into childcare than any other public policy in the history of this country. And why we can't get it done is just a mystery. I forget what the question is now, because I'm in a rage that we don't have it. But I think, you know, we have to look at this whole continuum of care and how that works, again, for different people in different places. Just a personal example, because I was a student when my first child was born, I missed the whole maternity parental benefit thing because I didn't qualify. But I realized later on, there was a period of time when my second child, my son, was about 12, 13, and going through some testosterone-driven growth spurt and whatever. That was when I needed parental benefits. Like, he needed his mother then. And so I think we have this whole, you know, rigid labor market and rigid societal structure that says, you know, you have to be in certain places at a certain time. And I think people need much more flexibility. So a continuum of care that includes childcare and preschool, parental care, teachers, other special supports for kids with special needs. I was accused on one radio interview of wanting a basic income at the expense of poor kids with autism. Like, no, like we need all of those care support systems, and they all can work in synergy.
Great. And I think we've got time for maybe one or two more questions. Lee Stevens, who's a member of Basic Income Calgary and a bit of a policy nerd, would probably not kill me, but maim me if I didn't ask you this question. Sheila, can you respond to the criticisms of basic income published by researchers at the U of C School of Public Policy back in May, specifically around, so quote, as research shows, a basic income, if delivered through the tax system, would miss 1 in 10 Canadians who do not file taxes. Access would likely be even worse among those with the deepest need.
Yeah, so my answer to that is, there's nothing there for you. Why would you file? If there's $2,000 a month available for you, you will find a way to file. And if CRA and the basic income movement help support the idea that people need assistance in dealing with government, and they really do, then we can address a lot of those problems that, you know, that prevent people from accessing benefits that they really need and that they're entitled to. The second part of the answer just flitted through my head, and what was it? Oh yeah, the other thing we learned from the Ontario pilot that I think is really important is that a lot of the reason people were hesitant to engage in the pilot and hesitant to file taxes was fear of government. And that fear of government is largely predicated on having experience with social assistance systems. They're ugly, they're punitive, they make you feel horrible no matter what your situation is. And that's not a good recipe for getting help. So I think there are ways of overcoming these things. But right now, I mean, there's so little help. I think Alberta is, you know, particularly in the bad books now. I think if you're single and not eligible for welfare, about the only thing you get is the federal goods and services tax credit. Like, there's not much of anything else. In Ontario, there's Trillium benefit and, you know, a few other things. But there's so little support for people who are, you know, working and struggling and trying to get by.
Okay, so I've got 2 last questions for you. One from Karen: do you think a shift away from GDP to another index needs to precede the introduction of UBI?
No, but doing both would be great. Or at least having a parallel system to GDP that shows, I mean, one of the things that I was involved in federal government just very quickly was developing household accounts with Statistics Canada that would show all of the work that goes into the household economy and the volunteer sector, and the kind of economic benefit that that brings, so that if you at least can have some kind of a more fulsome accounting system along with basic income, it would be huge, because it would really show results and governments can be proud of those results.
Great. Okay, and we'll leave the last question to Nancy. So this is new to me, but I've been hearing on the news that Manitoba is trying to incentivize people to go back to work by providing them $2,000 receiving CERB. Has the Basic Income Network been contacted to provide the alternative view and evidence?
Yeah, the short answer is no. The longer answer is they really should be consulting basic income experts, whether it's Manitoba or the federal government. Unfortunately, they've hired Kevin Milligan into PCO to help guide them, which is worrisome. So I think that's one of the things that we need to do as a movement. I think this is a good note to end, is that we all have to tout our own legitimacy and our own credentials and all of the work that we've done, and help people understand that, like, we can be a good resource for developing policy.
Great. Well, Sheila, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your time. I know you've been flitting from interview to webinar, so we very much appreciate your time today and your sharing your insights.
Thank you very much. And I really wish I could be in Calgary and see everybody. I mean, it was so wonderful when I was there before, even with the smoke. So hi, everybody. I miss you.
Thank you very much, Sheila.
Thank you.
Well, with that, we would like to close out today's session. So we just have a few things that we would like to share. So we have 4 actions for you. 1, when you close down and leave Zoom today, you'll be asked to fill out a feedback survey. It would be fantastic if you could do so. It would take 3 minutes. We would also like to announce that we have a new function on our website called Write Your MP. So if you go to basicincomecalgary.ca/take-action, and again, this will be a link actually in the notes that we provide, you'll be able to find who your MP is and write them a letter so that you can provide feedback to them with respect to basic income. You can also sign up for our newsletter at basicincome.alberta.ca. And you can show support for Basic Income Canada Network by going to basicincomecanaدا.org/support. I would very much like to thank the following individuals and organizations: to Basic Income Calgary and Enough for All. Thank you for presenting today's session. To our keynote, Sheila Regher. To our BI Plus speaker, Dr. Lewchuk. To our advocate guest, Kendal David. And inclusion support from the Disability Action Hall, which allows us to have ASL interpreters Janice and Debra join us, as well as captioner Laura. And then, of course, behind the scenes, we've got Colleen, Regehr, Kurt, Lee, and Wendy helping to make things run behind the scenes. And so with that, I would like to thank everybody for joining us today. We hope you have a fantastic remainder of the day and an even better remainder of the week. And please do keep an eye out for the video when we launch it, as well as when we send out the slide decks. Thank you all. Have a great day. Thank you for joining us.